Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Society of Design Arts and AIGA Baltimore for this online event with Annet Couwenberg. My name is Raquel Castedo, and I'm a member of both the AIGA Baltimore Board and SODA, which stands for the Society of Design Arts. This event wouldn't be possible without the collaboration with UMBC and Stevenson University. So I want to share a little bit with you about SODA and about AIGA, and then we're going to get started. So SODA was founded over 15 years ago in Baltimore by an all-volunteer group of teachers, students, and design professionals. All of them were passionate about the multiple histories of design arts, including graphic design, illustration, architecture, book arts, photography, and many more. SODA has already provided more than 100 programs that have explored diverse subjects. And to have a better idea of what we already programmed, please visit our website at sodabaltimore.com and check our past programs. You're gonna see that since 2019, we've been collaborating with AIGA Baltimore. If you don't know about AIGA, I want to tell you a little bit about it. It is the largest professional association of designers in the world, and it is committed to advancing the value and impact of design, both locally and globally, and working together to inspire, support, and learn from each other at every stage of our careers. Our 75 chapters are run 100% by volunteers, serving over 20,000 members across the nation. We're always looking for volunteers, speakers, and sponsors, so reach out if you want to get involved. And please check out what we're doing at baltimore.aiga.org. We're very excited today to have with us Annet and also Lori Rubeling, who curated her exhibition, So in Circles. Welcome, Lori, and welcome, Annet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So great to be here. Thank you for organizing this.
Yes. Thank you, Raquel, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We're broadcasting today from UMBC's Center for Art, Design, and Visual Culture, and we'd also like to do a shout out to Sims Gardner and his team for helping Annet realize this show. It's been a work in progress for over 2 years now, and we're very appreciative of their support.
Thank you. So I want to introduce, tell you all Annette's and Lori's bios real quickly. So Annet was born in the Netherlands and received an MFA, 2 MFA degrees, one from Cranbrook Academy of Art and another one from Syracuse University. She received a Smithsonian Artist and Research Fellowship in 2014. And her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including in Ansan and Seoul, Korea, New York City, and Tilburg, Netherlands. Her work has been reviewed widely, including in Le Monde, Los Angeles Times, The Washington Post, and the New York Times. Lori Rubeling is a professor of art and graphic design at Stevenson University. Her educational expertise is design research methods and theory. She has professionally applied her art and design skills in several contexts: theoretical architecture, interior architecture, theater and TV scenography design, exhibitions, and graphic design. Professor Rubeling was recently appointed faculty director of exhibitions for Stevenson University. Thank you again for being here. Thank you all the participants for joining us today. And now I would like to pass to Lori to start this conversation.
Thank you, Raquel. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to start this webinar event by sharing with you a video of the installation space. The videographer is Julia Golonka. She has also produced also a conversation between Annet and I that will be published soon. Okay. So here we are sitting in front of the north section of the exhibition, which is about research. here's a pan. You're looking at renourish, sculptures, the research section, which we're sharing prototypes and digital printing and all kinds of experimentation that Annet works on. The vitrines include several examples of her Dutch collar forms. And then this portion of the video is a view of her cleft, which is an 8-foot in diameter structure that at points resembles the Dutch collar, but also takes on more biomorphic forms. It is a collaboration between the engineering school here at UMBC as well as Alan Grove, right, who was the computational specialist. Thank you, Raquel. Beautiful. Okay, so everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Raquel, I have a couple questions to ask Annet, and then as she's talking, I will share my screen and I will share images that she's talking about. We're also going to invite anyone in the audience, if you to ask questions, to post them in the Q&A section, and then at a certain point, roughly maybe 20-30 minutes in, if you'd like to join the conversation, raise your hand and you can join us. And so it could be more of a community conversation between the two of us. So please talk to us about textiles.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Raquel. To be here is an honor, and I wanted to thank Lori specifically. Lori and I have been working for 2 years to really get this 10 years of research together and trying to understand myself, what I'm doing. And one of the things that is at the basis of my practice is textiles. And I see textiles as the most human element in our life. You will be wrapped in textiles, as my teacher would say at Cranbrook, Gerhard Nodell. You get wrapped in textiles when you're born, and we end in cloth. So cloth is a really interesting subject because it is the one that touches us on the skin, and touch is reciprocal. It's one of the senses that really not only talks to us, but we talk to it. So I feel that clothing and textiles really is a way of talking about not only the humanity, but it's talking about technology. It's talking about social understanding. It's talking about belonging. It's talking about a lot of interesting ways of looking at culture. So I feel like there is within the medium a lot for me to explore, partly because I was educated in textiles, and it was important for me to honor my background in textiles. So I really feel that is a big part of it, of the work and the basis of the work.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting and important. And the notion, right, that we are swaddled, right, in clothes and in a textile when we're born, and that's our first kind of interface with the world, is very, very interesting outside of the mother's body, right? It's really cool. So can you, folks, we're going to then move into the relationship between traditional craft and how it intersects emergent technology. And of course, this is what Annet has been up to for the last 10 years. It's so interesting and very important creative research. My first encounter of it was at Jacquard College and an exhibition where she first shared with us her research and then experiments from the SARF, from the Smithsonian Artist Residency Fellowship.
Yep.
And it was not it's not typically what you see in an exhibition. So that's what caught my attention. So can you explain textile systems for us?
I see within society, and as I look at textiles, I look at interesting textile systems in the sense of that it has to do with technology, but it has to do with social norms, it has to do with culture. So there are a lot of systems there, but I really feel that textiles are about communication, again, about belonging, about telling us who we are, telling us how we act in the world, how precarious that kind of balance is between social norm and private desires. I feel like I use textiles as a metaphor for that. So the textile systems of communications and the systems of connection, I like to investigate those in the sense of what are those structures and how can I translate those through systems of accumulation, in a sense of weaving, in a sense of how I can take them apart, look at them, and understand my role within this system.
Cool. So thank you, Annette. And what's showing on the screen right now is a diagram that kind of, in a snapshot, conveys Annette's value and meaning framework. And it's very interesting because a value can be a function, as well as certainly an appreciation or an aesthetic relationship to something. But in Annette's working and investigating textile, meaning emerges through the making of something. And so that's what this diagram conveys. So I'm just going to show you stills from the exhibition. Here is Cleft. And here we're looking at digital to damask to digital. Or,
yeah.
Yep. And which these were, can you talk a little bit about these these weavings and where they occur in your 10-year exploration?
So I'm looking a lot at the idea of technology as a means that comes from textiles. So if we think about the idea of that the Jacquard loom was the predecessor of the computer, I wanted to experiment with see how I can work with a commercial Jacquard loom and how that would translate when I, how does a technique that you can do by hand, but that you can do with the computer too. How does that change? What is that going from the analog to the digital? So I worked at the Textile lab in Tilburg, the Netherlands, and I used the inspiration from my Dutch background in the sense of Delft blue. And not only that, but I used the idea of the photographs of my work and then translated it into decorative ways of thinking to see how I can take a pixel and then translate it into a thread. And I discovered that there is no direct link between a pixel and a thread, that I needed to really take a good look and see how I needed to translate that. So again, that translation from the analog to the digital into the Jacquard loom then becomes a really interesting part of my research. And I've learned a lot in that sense.
Thank you, Annette. And on the screen right now, we're in the foreground are 5 rondelles. In fact, we also are sitting in front of one of them as well. These are the second iteration of your exploration working in the Jacquard loom, right? In the Textile lab. And a tremendous shift was made, right? The weave got tighter, became more complex, more different colors of threads were involved. And you also started to incorporate laser cutting and also hand assembly and things like that. One of the interesting keywords, here's another view of these rondelles. Again, when you come and visit the show, these spaces, the digital designs are really interesting. They do include motifs from her SARF research experience, looking at histology, fish histology slides, which are thin slices of fish skeletons. We're also seeing Delft Dutch motifs. And the interesting thing about Renourish, which is the sculptures in front, they're tree structures. So again, this is another exploration that Annette's been up to in thinking about biomorphism. In this case, the structures are inspired from trees growth.
Yeah.
And then the importance of floating the rondelles in a horizontal plane is to evoke motion, right? And again, your exploration here is iterative, right? In other words, in your learning and you're developing your discipline of moving from analog to digital, you just start things, new ways of thinking about working just emerge and you start to play with them, right? We would definitely say that. I think what is so interesting about the horizontal rondelles is the motion, is the water-like motion. At points you feel like you're looking at carp floating, you know, in water spaces.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about that technology has really expanded the range of form, and not only in the sense of digital making, but in the sense of physical making. And I think that that's really what I'm looking at. How can I start understanding that by doing it? I believe in research through making and making through research, in the sense of trying these things out so that we can really think about how does Jacquard move to core memory for computers, and then how it translates and how we can observe this logical lineage from the Jacquard loom to what the computer and the digital systems can do. So I'm really always looking at iteration as a way of trying these things out and to learn. And in the end, it is about learning about self and learning about who we are and learning about how textiles has a role not only in the world as wearing it, but in the world as cultural and social understanding.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. Actually, I'm going to kind of go through a couple more of these slides because I think they're really interesting. Here is an example of sort of cultural interfaces, right? In fact, folks, the pansori singers, Korean pansori singers, Annet photographed and documented in 2010, 2011. You have 2 series of these. And she was visiting artists in several places in South Korea. She met working with these group of singers, chorus group. She you know, just, I guess, you intersected the Dutch collar in with these very formal dress, this formal dress, folk dress. And of course, some of us might not know this. I certainly didn't know until Annet told me, is Dutch tradesmen, right? Certainly traded with the Korean peninsula, and sometimes were shipwrecked, sometimes were captured. And there is a cultural dialogue between the two nations, which is really interesting. These videos are 10-minute loops. She asks the singers to be still, like do not move. But of course they have to breathe. It's very difficult to stay still for 10 minutes, but it's, again, these are portraits, but moving in time. They are in conversation with Dutch portraits, right? And tradition. And that you want to say anything more about these?
Yeah, first of all, it was an incredible experience to work with the pansori singers, who are extremely talented in what they do. So what I asked them to do is to actually internalize their songs, the most important songs for them. Partly because as an immigrant, I feel we internalize how we were brought up, this kind of conflictual relationship between what we desire ourselves, how we and how we were told what we need to desire. So I wanted them to internalize that and not sing, not express it in words, but to really go back into the body and take it in, and then hopefully it would be visible in the videos. I asked them, I worked about for 3 weeks with them. I asked them if they would be willing to talk with me about what they felt in the sense of the hybridization as I saw it, of having their own hanbok, their own costume, their own kind of identity, and then the identity of the Dutch color. Because I did do a lot of research, and in the 17th century, there was a Dutch ship that wrecked in the south of Korea. And because I discovered all of a sudden in my research in the costumes that there were wooden shoes. And I was like, how did they get wooden shoes? And it ended up that the Dutch were taken prisoners in the southern part and were actually put to work. But it was interesting to see kind of the hybridization and the mixture of those two cultures. So that's what I look at for myself. It's like how, as a person who's born in the Netherlands, moved to the United States and became a citizen in 2016, not that long ago, what this means to me and how I use clothing as a metaphor to really understanding self.
Thank you, Annette. That's it's really, really interesting. And it's beautiful. This work is beautiful, and it's arresting to see the interface, see the cultural interface between these things. Do we want to talk about shapeshifters at all? Would that be important to you?
This is really the last project I did, and I have to mention before we continue that it's called sewing circles because yes. I don't do anything by myself. I have a lot of help. I have a lot of students, alumni, and some of you I saw are on the call. It's so great to see you, who helped me with a lot, and partly because I need to learn. I want to learn. I always want to move forward. I'm very interested constantly in what is out there that I don't know, so that I learn about self again. I want to talk a little bit about the pattern. I think patterning for me has a really interesting meaning. It actually tells me a lot about self too. Because of repetition, it's as Lars Barbrook says, it's about the passage. It's about doing it, about the process itself. And during that time of making the patterns, it really gives me that repetitive work, what is so part of textiles, the gluing of the pieces, the folding of the work, the pattern in itself is a way for me to think about variations. Yeah. And shape-shifting is a next step of how these pieces maybe can start moving by themselves with some machine on it. Yeah, not there yet.
Yeah, so thank you, Annette, for transitioning to the sewing circle context, because that is certainly a thread throughout all your work. And I'm going to move up to cleft right now. Hopefully I can find it again right here. And could you talk about the origin of this form and its permutations?
This form was started in 2016. As I just said, that's when I became an American citizen. And at that point, I really started understanding that I now couldn't be in the middle of the ocean, that I really needed to embrace, and looking always out for being Dutch, but I had to embrace this, this culture where I was and the history of it. So I chose the Dutch color as the form. And at that point, I made it as an static piece of sculpture, but always had in mind that I wanted to really make this move. And because I felt that if I would step into this piece and the audience would step into this piece, that there would be a reaction of the body and that it could be influenced. So almost like that the audience would become the digital puppeteer to start regulating, moving things, as much as I felt that I was regulated by my Dutch upbringing and then becoming an immigrant and being assimilated or not. You know, the question of assimilation came to mind. How much do I have to assimilate? How much am I allowed to stay on with my own identity? And so I was trying to figure that out. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to work with the students here at UMBC, what was incredible for a year, but it was during COVID, so it was complicated. And I have to say, I'm giving, I have to honor another sewing circle person who really helped me, the guardian angel, Alan Grover, who really helped me make this dream come true. Here you can't see it, but the piece does move and it changes the shadow on the floor. The lace becomes the ephemeral part, and then the piece itself becomes steady part.
Yeah, this, the CLEP, you know, what's so interesting from my observation of watching the iteration of this form, among other things, nothing is ever really static in Annette's studio. She doesn't hesitate to iterate context of her objects because as she gains more knowledge, she then interprets that and uses it to advance things. You know, Annette, I don't necessarily, when I look at your work, you know, I'm not thinking necessarily of immigrant.
Of course.
And I'm not, so I love the parallel, you know, that anyone can enter in the work through its form and its structure and its elegance in its making, and certainly the amount of work and effort that you've done. And then you have your more private investigations that is evolving into becoming more public, right? And so we're going to go to the Family Affair series right now. And that's a better view of it. And this work was first shown, this is what, among other things, Dan Myers, who's Annette's husband, is the photographer of record. Her daughter, Mara, and her partner, B, are the models, and they are modeling wearing Annette's objects. And why don't you take it from there, Annette?
Yeah, I think going back to Clef's a little bit, but older work, I think for me to start thinking about vulnerability and what it is to put these pieces back on the body because they come from the body is really important. Because I think I'm trying to deal with my inheritance, and I use the Dutch color as the symbol for that. And of course, we need to remember that the Dutch didn't invent it, it came from Spain, but it was adapted by the Dutch painters, especially in the 17th century. And I always felt that they were so, there were this contradiction, what I constantly feel in my own life, in the sense of being this in between, the contradiction between in the colors of beauty, but constriction. So what is the beauty? What is the constriction? And then Kara Ober at Be More Art, I have to give her all the credits, kept saying to me that I needed to put pieces back on the body. You see them here in front as sculptures where I could take a certain amount of distance. And I was very vulnerable about that. I didn't want to, and then she finally convinced me. So I did not want to do it in another studio. I needed to happen at home with my family. And they were put back on the body. And that moment that we did that was just before COVID. It was a very special moment where I gathered the family and we gathered the pieces and we started looking at it. And I felt fully present at that moment, together, talking about the work, where did it belong, how we were going to show them. And those questions again of thinking about, you know, whose shoulders I'm standing on, I'm really thinking a lot about right now. I always think about the sewing sessions of my mother, my aunts, and my grandmother as kind of the impetus of all this work, the beginning of this work. And now looking at my family, my daughter and her partner, as the next generation who will take on this question of the next generation of the immigrant, and how does that develop itself? So I see this as commemorative textiles, as commemorating a moment, commemorating family, commemorating sharing, commemorating, think about who we are, where we're from, and how we place the body within the central part of our way of thinking about the world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Annette. Folks, I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now. And I would, now is the time, if you'd like, to ask your questions, to join our conversation. Raquel, do you have questions for us?
Yeah, so first, I want to congratulate you, Annette and Lori, on the exhibition. It looks really gorgeous. I'm going to be visiting it this week. And I'm looking forward to it. It's really, the work is really delicate and powerful. It's so it's amazing to listening to you talking about your process. We do have a question from Kelly Cobb, who's probably not with us anymore because had to leave, but I want to share the question because I think it's interesting. And we're going back to the beginning when you were talking about your process. So your research process. So the question is, how did you arrive at that visualization of your research process? So I don't know, do you think it makes sense maybe to show it again, Lori? Do you have it?
Oh, the research process. Oh, the framework
Yes.
diagram. Okay, sure. Hold on for a second. We'll go back there.
And while Lori, show us the visualization, the diagram again, we want to encourage you to share your questions, and you also have the opportunity to, if you want to ask your question live using your microphone, we invite you to raise your hand, communicate let us know that you have a question and want to share the question with us.
Thank you, Kelly, for that question. I think it is an amazing diagram myself. It's wonderful when you work with a curator who can actually put this 2 years of work in a diagram that makes total sense. But I'm going to give it over to Lori to talk about that.
So among other things, Kelly is a graduate of Annette's Fibers department, and Kelly and I have also worked a long time ago at MICA as well. So sorry that she couldn't stay, but it's wonderful that she asked this question. So in this, this diagram emerged this summer as Annette was working on some public talks that you were giving in Europe. And as, again, there's a production journal for the exhibition, and which is also a very interesting document. So as I was listening to Annette, she was becoming more, she was being able to explain sort of the value and where we were in the exhibition. And so she started to discuss, well, she was definitely in her paper, in her talk, she was talking about whose shoulders is she standing on. Now that Isaac Newton wrote that to someone, I forget who it was, acknowledging that all of our efforts are building from historical precedents and in dialogue with other people. Again, it's a man wouldn't necessarily use the term sewing circle, but Annette's origin story is absolutely her family sewing circle. Anyway, so I'm listening to Annette talk, and in my understanding of research is I am always interested in not talking about the relationships between things in a linear manner. I think our knowledge is dynamic and it works on several planes. And so this diagram basically is indicating that making is Annette's product, and the making is textile discipline knowledge. And she emphasizes that continually all the time, that this is knowledge, and the discipline knowledge is very important. However, the values that are included in this knowledge, in this making practice, includes autobiography, textile histories, social iconography, textile language, digital interfaces, and facilitation. So I could have used the term sewing circles here, but I wanted it to be more, probably more universal. So anyway, and of course, throughout our conversation today, all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Yeah, 6 values have been discussed in many, many different ways. So the meaning is physical, right? Is in the textiles being made and the work being made. But what's driving Annette's vision and creativity is her curiosity, is her ethos, and her ethic. And I, that's the humanity of it, right? So again, this diagram is a diagram that I've been using for 20 years now. It's called A Circle to a Line. And again, it's thinking about the relationships of knowing, or, what is known and the way it is known, right? As opposed to thinking, well, I know this, right? It's showing more of a dialogue, it's showing the communication of things. Do you want to comment any more about this?
Yeah, and I think it's amazing as an artist to as I said before, to talk with the curator for 2 years and really start explaining what you're doing, and then getting this gift of a diagram, because I do believe that my work is an ongoing cycle. It's not the iteration, the next iteration is already here. And it is my curiosity to find anew all the time. I go to the studio with that idea that I need to find the next thing, what I don't know yet. And I find that this explains it extremely well. It's hanging in my studio, really big.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Raquel.
Any other?
Thank you. Yeah, we have some comments on Margaret Wibner says hi from Amsterdam and congratulates you on your beautiful show, and asks if you're thinking about bringing this works back to the Netherlands. Do you have plans to, is the exhibition tour, going on tour?
Great question, Margaret, and thank you so much for being here. I miss you. We are making a plan. I mean, there's quite a list that we would like to travel to. I can't say yet when or where, but we are trying to have this travel for sure. For me, it will be an important part of bringing it back to the Netherlands and finding that moment of bringing the two countries together, like they are in me. So it will be really wonderful to reflect on that. So I hope so. Keep you informed.
Great, thank you, Annette. So while we were talking about your process and your research connected to the practice and how you go back and forth, and your research grows with this your practice, I was thinking about the different pieces that we were seeing in the photos. The 3D pieces and the 2D pieces with the patterns. And I was wondering how in your process, how you feel, what drives you to express yourself in 3D or 2D, and how, how do you make a decision on how you're gonna be presenting your idea?
That's a great question. I've always been interested in the idea of the flat pattern in textiles, or the decorative pattern, in the sense of the flat, but that it becomes kind of a representation of depth, or a representation of it. But I was a fashion designer for a few years in New York, and I work and understand working with a 2D pattern into a 3D entity, and that is something that I intuitively almost understand, as much as my family had Tuesdays, their sewing sessions. And again, I was exposed to that, the moment that you take a piece of cloth and then start wrapping it around your body. So for me, it's always been that way. But I think it's textiles. I mean, a textile thread for me is as three-dimensional as a piece of cloth. I mean, a thread has its own identity, has its own inherent quality. It is already an entity, what is in 3 dimensions. So I don't see it as totally 2D, I see it as 3D. When we go over and under, when we think about how the thread moves and accumulates, it is all about 3-dimensional thinking. I think in architectonics too, I mean, in the sense of thinking more architectural, I see the body as the skeleton and then the cloth as the skin. And that's how I came to understand the fish too. I realized that the fish, their evolution is very connected with the interdependence of those two. So I think about it in both ways.
Amazing. Thank you for your answer. And I was wondering, because how heavy are the 3D the colors, like how heavy are they? The representation and the photos with the people wearing them. It looks, because they're holding it, kind of looks, you know, because maybe they're holding because they're fragile, but it'll also, you can, because you don't know, it could feel like they're holding them because it's heavy. Yeah. So
I mean, actually not that heavy, no. But I think I love that idea that you think that there is a certain kind of weight. Again, that is that conflictual relationship between something that's quite beautiful, but quite painful to wear. I think you have to talk with my daughter Mara and her partner B about how painful it was to put them on their head and around their body. But it is for me, it is that implied kind of that conflictual relationship between the two. And that's a conflictual relationship I will always be in. I'm not Dutch anymore. I'm not really American, so I'm always in between. And it's actually a great place to be. And we need to see both sides.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. This idea of freedom of being of both places, but also you start feeling that you're not from a specific place, right? So it's very interesting.
I do believe that at a certain point, art for me becomes then the way to talk about this in a lot more, an easier way than in a language. And, you know, I still remember the moment that I came to this country, although it was a long time ago, but not knowing the language, being afraid, being vulnerable, that you made a mistake, not knowing how to spell things, or maybe spelling was my best thing, but not really knowing how to make a sentence, always turning things around. So that idea of that vulnerability is still part of me. And I still feel, you know, am I doing it the right way? Or, anyway.
Thank you, Annet. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question from George Siskel. Hi, George. The question is, how would you describe the meaning of your teaching practice as it relates to your creative process as an artist?
Hi, George. Thank you so much for being here. And what an amazing question. They're intertwined. I am an artist educator. I can't split them, and I don't. And they actually inform each other all the time. Part of the reason I'm trying all these things out with lots of help again of people. I have quite a group of people I need to honor. But when you come to the show, you can see who all have helped me with this, to really move myself forward in education, to understand the digital technology. I realized at a certain point, as a textile artist, as a craft artist, as a woman, I needed to be part of the DFAB lab, the digital fabrication lab. I wanted to come in with materials that were more flexible, pliable, even that would maybe smell. When I was burning felt, they always knew I was in the building. But to really show students that's every time there's a new technology, that it needs to become your interface, needs to become your tool, and how do you use it within your own medium? So those two are integral, and I can never split those. And I think the work you see here in the show has a lot to do of what I've done at the Maryland Institute College of Art as a educator. And I think it's, and for me, it has enriched my practice.
There's actually more formal strategies Annet has developed and cultivated, Unravel the Code, which is co-taught with
Ryan Hoover. That is an international class, but it's really looking at craft and the intersection of emerging technologies. So how can the medium of textiles or craft, how can weaving inform Rhino and Grasshopper? How can it inform, and how can it go back from Rhino and Grasshopper 3D programming to weaving. How can it inform each other and how can it enrich each other? So I've done it in class, in the sense of offering classes that way. And that means you have to try it out. I don't believe in just reading in a book. I'm an experiential learner. I need to do it to start understanding it. I'm not going to claim here that I understand it all, but at least I know the principles, and that's great for teaching.
And I ought to also say that Annette understands knowledge as embodied knowledge. And of course, textiles, because, you know, as Annette, as we started off today, right, Annette's saying, you know, we get swaddled in cloth, right, to protect our body. That's an embodiment, right, and the touch factor and all these things, that it's very important to her. And that's the interesting part actually of working on Cleft when Annette was collaborating with the students, engineer students. Their learning at the undergraduate level is more theoretical, right? They work in, they make prototypes and they calculations, and, you know, they practice all their different mechanical knowledge, right? Yeah. But they have minimal experience in actually executing a design idea. And that was really fascinating, right? And there's tremendous benefit in actual making of something and testing it out in that iterative process. The other thing we could say here is that Annette, certainly Annette and I, and many of us are not digital native, right? So students, undergraduate, you know, so college students, contemporary college students really help us out. Those of us that have, that we weren't born into the space, right? Thinking digitally, it's very beneficial. As Annette says, she keeps them on her hip to help her out. It's reciprocal.
It's very reciprocal. And the other thing I wanted to add to, in the sense of the engineer students, I have to start looking at my work through their language. And I, as an educator, I always keep saying, it's really not the greatest idea to go to the front door. You should climb on the back wall to the third floor, to that tiny little window, and go in there, because then you learn something new. And if I say that, I need to do it myself to understand what that feels like. And with the engineering students, trying to explain what I wanted was really important for me, to try to translate that in a different language than my own language. Because when I say to them embodied language, they will look at me like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's language we use in textiles. So I think it's for all of us really important to step out of our comfort zone and learning other ways of thinking. I think we can be more inclusive. We can be more, we understand more of ourselves. And I hope that will come out in the work.
Yeah, the adage, learn one, do one, then teach one, right? Yeah. It's in the teaching one that the Cleft embodied in so many, on so many levels. It was very, very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a comment on this, on your answer and the question. Valeska Populo said, I appreciated that question, George, about the connection between Annette's artistic and teaching practice. As a former student of yours, she sees in the exhibition such a powerful example of an artist who demonstrates and models the iterative aspects of the creative process and communicate that thinking to others. So for that reason, Valeska congratulates both of you, the exhibition. So we have a couple of more questions. One about color, your use of color. So the question is, do you think blue and white are Dutch colors? What about orange? What is your inspiration for choosing the colors?
Thank you so much for that question that I started to.
And the question is from Marlene.
Marlene van Arendonk. Yeah. Hi, Marlene from Holland. Such a great question, Marlene. I started laughing because I worked so much in white for so long. And people asked me why I was using white. And I thought, I may be afraid of color. I don't know what it is. I wasn't really sure. I can have an artist talk about white in general, but it wasn't that connected with me. I think blue, I do feel has to do with Delft blue for me, although that is not very Dutch. It comes, of course, from China. But when I was doing research on Delft blue, you know, the color is so intense. It's so connected to how we feel about Delft blue in the Netherlands that I wanted to use that. The pink in the background of the commemorative textiles with Mara and B was really made in collaboration with the whole family. That was a discussion. It's quite a change for me. It's quite scary for me. I don't know why I'm so scared of it, but it's, I'm careful. The digital to the mask were supposed to be in black and white. And then as Marlene knows, she was the one who drove me to Tilburg, to the textile lab. Thank you still. You see, I need to fall back on a lot of people. I changed it from black and white to blue. And I think because at that point, because of my bike accident and being in a wheelchair, I was ready for a change. And it just came to me, and I love blue. It has something about, you know, the kind of vanishing point that I see in the color, the kind of, it moves into space. So I love that.
And the range of blues here, you know, move from cool, warm, cool grays, right, into deep, rich blues that almost appear black. So there is a color range going, there is a range of tones and visual experience. I think we could say in general, though, shadows and highlights probably are as an important aspect of Annette's work as whatever color it is. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for your answer. So our next question, it starts with a comment, and the question is at the end. So it's from John Paul Morabito. I hope you're saying it right. So thank you, Annette. It's great to hear you talking about your work. So John is seeing an oxymoronic thread running through this work, where specificity becomes a catalyst for the expansive thinking. The deep disciplinary knowledge of textiles and your Dutch immigrant experience appear to be points of origin through which the work extends outward to consider broader questions of technology and sociality. Fashion, body, architecture, technology, history, culture. It all comes back to textiles. Joan would love to hear you speak more on the way in which such disciplinarity or specificity functions as a gateway for the expansive, the expansion of your practice.
Great question, John Paul. So great to have you here. An amazing weaver himself, and a MICA grad too. I do think that for me, textiles are based in systems thinking, that we think in, you know, it's the idea of that as a painter wants to put a red dot in the top corner, he will put the red dot there, and we will work up to it. So that idea of how we think is very much in systems, and that is really connected with technology. There's a direct lineage between the Jacquard loom or weaving to how we think in algorithms. Algorithms are systems. Algorithms are based on of the idea of how we experience the world. Algorithms are not things that the computer comes up with. We put it in. So they reflect society, they reflect culture, and they reflect who we are. And I feel that that humanity through textiles is then a way for me to really start thinking about how we can communicate that in a very kind of direct way. And something what I find really important for my work too, is that actually people recognize as something that belongs to everybody. When I was an undergraduate, I remember looking at sculptures, and I do love sculpture, obviously. I was seeing a lot of kind of autonomous, erected things that were referring to themselves. And textiles always starts to refer to the humanity and to more intimacy. So anytime I think about how to interpret technology and go deeper into what the intimate system is, I think about textiles of the way of entering.
Can I add some more to that? So I think there's a doubling here of subjectivity, right? We have the subjective of the maker of the textile, and the making of the textile is a story, is a narrative, is a memory. They're remembering the discipline and they're actualizing the discipline. And then of course the discipline becomes usable, I guess. And then of course, through the viewer, right, the encounter with an object, then the subjective is the doubling of how do I work with that, interpret this. And Annette's work, what I've become very much aware of is my obviously subjective desires and how I get excited thinking about, oh, Annette, I want you to scale these up to architecture, right? I've been saying that for years now, but of course that's my subjective. Now, but what I want to say though, in terms of this discipline and knowledge, and this connects to my research and interest, is in pre-Socratic philosophy or knowledge, modeling understandings of things was the way in which you understood it. And then it also made it shareable. So we have Anaximander of Miletus. He's making models of celestial movements, of maps, you know, of a sundial, right? Just to say this is, you know, the sun moves and we can predict its movement and it helps us tell time or whatever, right? Well, textiles was also the histon, the vertical frame of weaving was also the way in which the home became established. It became the hearth of a home, right? And that the order and that textile ordering was applied to the order of the city. And if a city was ordered, its city streets were a grid, right? That order would help the city become orderly, help support the democracy, the unification of its people who inhabited it. It's really fascinating. Now, Socratic thought just moves into abstraction and it loses making entirely. It doesn't value it. But Annette's, I just wanted to, I think this knowledge, this universal knowledge is equal to that, but it's a different tradition. Yeah.
I think I can add something to it. I don't know how we're doing with other questions, but I do believe that for me, I'm looking at the textile tradition as the analog, and then the textile tradition through the technology. And what I'm mostly interested in is how actually the digital world or the digital can change or corrupt even the information, the system. So if I take a weave draft and I start then importing that into Rhino or into Grasshopper, how does the algorithm actually take that on? Is it corrupting it? Is it changing it? Is it shifting the nature? Is it shifting the meaning? And so for me, it is a tool. Technology then becomes a tool that comes from weaving anyway, but is a tool for me to observe, to understand, and to see what the digital does to that, and then taking it out of the computer and then start weaving it again in my hands, going back to the analog, is again, how does it shift? How is it, is there a corruption going on? Is there a shift going on? Is there a glitch? Or how does it translate? So for me, it is a logical kind of going from the analog to the digital and to technology to understand that ambiguity, the kind of contrast, anyway.
So just everyone notice how many questions Annette just asked herself there. And that is what drives her practice, right? Curiosity and inquiry. It's really beautiful, and that's really great. Okay. It's really great, folks. Thank you, Annette.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. We still have 2 more questions, and I think then we're gonna start wrapping up. So one question is from Suzanne Levine. Suzanne says, good afternoon, dear friend. I would love to hear more about the concept of structure. Being from a long line of tailors, I know using buckram to shape and the relationship with bones and Dutch colors. I don't know if I made sense, but I guess you understood what Suzanne is asking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne, for being here. I really appreciate your support always. I think that I had to embrace when I came to this country that I come from a land that is quite structured. And I think part of it has to do, as you said, being from a family of makers, tailors, hat makers. But it comes too from a land that fights water all the time, especially right now. 2/3 of the Netherlands is below sea level. So we constantly have to control nature. So I think systems are for us second nature because we have to. If the infrastructure is not there to hold the water at bay, we're in trouble. And how we then use the nature in the sense of a land that is filled with salt water is really a lot of talking to each other, a lot of systems to make this work and to control nature. So besides that, I love putting together, patterns that then become 3D forms and that they have to fit, right? Otherwise you can't put your arm in it or you can't move, or it is, we're brought up with systems, I think. We're very systematically oriented. One of the other things is that in my family, it was Sunday, it was always the rest day, then Monday was laundry day, and Tuesday was sewing day, not Wednesday, Tuesday. So it was every time the same. So I'm used to that. So systems are part of my DNA.
Amazing. Wow. There's another question. Sorry, Lori.
Well, that's okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm fine. You can go.
No, it's about language. So I think that's, also connected to what you're talking about Netherlands. Victoria Paz asks, Victoria wonders how you think about the relationship between craft and design in your work. Is that a distinction present in your first language, or is that a distinction introduced in working in the US in an English, language context? So would you like to comment on that?
Hi, by the way, I'm so lucky to have these incredible, smart people who ask amazing questions. I think it has to do with my background. I was quite amazed when I came to the United States that people made this kind of the discussion of art design and craft. I see it as a fluid connection. In art making, we need craft. In art making, we need design, and all those three are very fluid in the sense of going back and forth into my work. I actually would say I am a craftsperson first and foremost because of my dedication to crafts and honoring crafts in textiles. But I'm a designer, although I go less to that, I would say, and I'm a sculptor, and it doesn't make a difference. We need to, I think any discipline is limited. And if we're not starting to talk to each other and not looking at different discipline to give us information, it's kind of sad. And I think we have to make this fluid.
Yeah. Definitely. Cool. Thank you so much, Annet. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Raquel. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, the participants. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your amazing questions. We could keep talking for another hour, I'm sure. And I just want to remember everyone that the exhibition is open until December 11. And I'm sharing now in the chat the information about the time, the hours. And please, if you didn't visit the exhibition, please do it. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
coming.